Yes, we are live. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining me, TikTok. Thanks for joining me, all the affiliates. Charles Moscowitz here. Michael D. Shaw is my guest. A couple of people don't want to talk about what we're talking about, what everyone's talking about. What else is there to talk about? And that is the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Obviously, I mean, it's something we have to analyze. I mean, I think people in my circle are in a state of shock and grief over this, of course. And I've had some contact with him over the years. I've admired his work for a long time. And one of the things I admired about Charlie, before we get into, what's going on here and who did this, is that he would stride out into the colleges. And it's something that I kind of always thought of doing myself and kind of emulated. But he would pluck himself right in the middle of the most radical, hard, really, bitter, mean, twisted leftists.
Belly of the beast.
Yeah. And really, he would conduct himself with such kindness and patience. I never saw him yell, never saw him raise his voice. He never, he was so graceful that people would become disarmed. And they would continue screaming as if they couldn't hear anything. But yet he would answer people with such logic and such basic common sense that he was making major inroads. It was an extraordinary thing to watch. He was an unabashed conservative. He was an open and unabashed Christian, believed in Jesus and talked about it often. He was pro-Israel. He was pro-America. But excuse me, the most important thing in terms of what's happened here, I think, is that he was pro-Trump. And not only was he pro-Trump, but he was with Trump from the very beginning. And his work had a lot to do with Trump winning. And I think that for whatever reason, I had been following him more closely recently, watching his videos. And I think from what I was observing, and even from what I've heard informally from people that are on campuses, that he was making considerable inroads into the college campuses. He was turning people away from leftism. He was bringing people in. In a way, he was very similar to Rush Limbaugh in that way. And in fact, Rush Limbaugh, there's a video going around of Rush Limbaugh meeting him when he was only an 18-year-old kid working, I think, for Breitbart. He's always has been interested in politics. And Rush Limbaugh said, this guy has some quality that he could end up becoming the next president of the United States. And I think he probably could have and would have. He was that kind of a guy. I mean, and I think that the momentum that he was developing, I mean, it's, in my opinion, no matter how this thing goes down, I think he had to have been someone that the establishment had to stop. And, because he was really, I mean, this was an attack on President Trump. This is an attack on all of us. They took out one of the most important players in the MAGA movement. What say you, Mike? Mike, are you there? Okay, looks like
he was going into the belly of the beast. There you go. Yeah, he was going into the belly of the beast because the colleges and, frankly, the high schools, more than any other institutions, have been responsible for this, let's call it destruction of decent society. So he was a tremendous threat because to be able to go in there and counter these leftists on their home turf to the point where if you watch these debates, and as you mentioned, sometimes people would just go nuts. They'd start yelling and screaming. Other times they'd go catatonic, but he would remain very calm. Mm-hmm. And, we can go back to, because my son actually called me last night and said, he doesn't really follow politics all that avidly, but he said, what is the deal? Where did all this come from? The capture of the institutions by the left. And I said, how far back do you want to go? But we can look at the early 1960s with the school prayer decisions.
Yes.
The radicalization of academia that really started supposedly with the Vietnam War, civil rights protests. And it kind of just went on completely unfettered. There are people that are calling this a professional hit. And let's face it, if you're going to get somebody with one shot from 200 yards away, you're not just some random madman.
No, it looks that way. I mean, it has a similar look to the Butler, Pennsylvania shooting attempt. Some guy was on a roof across from them. There's another video making the rounds, and I know here I am putting on a little tin hat, but so be it.
Right.
There's a video of a guy standing behind him about a minute before the shot. And he's doing like some kind of looks like what a coach does in a baseball game, touching his hat, and he is holding his smartphone in a certain way, like positioning it behind his head. I don't know what that's about.
Sort of signaling or something.
That's what it looks like to me. I mean, I'm just observing from really not a point of knowledge. I mean, nobody knows, but I wonder who that was. I mean, it would look like there was some kind of a message going out. I mean, maybe a positioning of something. And, as you say, I mean, it looks like this is is even being called, and rightfully, an assassination by the governor of Utah. And that's what we're looking at. This is like, I mean, I feel that it's like when Kennedy was assassinated or when Martin Luther King was assassinated. And by the way, I just want to add as a little sidebar that I don't recall back then when they were assassinated, anyone talking about the guns. Nobody was talking about what gun was used. That's not relevant. They were talking about what this meant, the social and political meaning of this murder. That's what they were talking about, and that's what they should be talking about now. But they want to avoid that. They want to switch the topic.
Well, in the aftermath of this, I don't know how close you've been following it, but there were multiple postings of people that were celebrating this.
Yes.
But what's happened in the media, MSNBC actually fired, what's his name? I'm sorry, I don't follow them, so I don't know. Matthew Dowd.
For making really despicable remarks, but yet, if you look at what his remarks are, and you can see it's posted on the Gateway Pundit, it's no different than the bull crap they've been saying for years. Oh, it's they're blaming Trump, and they're blaming division, divisiveness, and they're blaming the right wing violence and all this.
Well, here's the thing: it's no different, but using the name of Charlie's organization, this may be some sort of turning point, because there have all been massive firings of people who posted such things.
Yes, yeah, finally.
It's almost like, if you want to get biblical about it, the horrible story in Judges 19 and 20 about the revolution, the revolt against the Benjaminites for what they did, and people can read it. It's not that long.
Mm-hmm.
Where, everybody was just trying to get along and trying to be tolerant, and then a line was crossed, and that was it. And the only reason the revenge stopped is they were about to wipe out the entire tribe of Benjamin.
Right,
but
right.
I think that what happened is now a line has been crossed, and we're reminded of the rather old statement by Fulton Sheen that there's too much tolerance. He didn't say flat out, tolerance is not a Christian virtue, which it isn't, but he wrote in, I believe, 1931, that there's too much tolerance of evil. I can read the whole quote if you want, but I think people are now taking a look. And one of the things I saw on X today was a picture of Mr. Rogers, the kind of Christian we'd like to be, and then juxtaposing a picture of some Knights Templar warrior, the type of Christian we have to be in light of what's going on. So yes. I think maybe this has awakened people that think it just, so to speak, no more Mr. Nice Guy. Clearly, there was some party brought in to do this.
Right.
It was well planned. I think they're going to catch the guy. Who knows? He himself might have been already assassinated.
Well, there's already, some pictures of someone who looks like they've been seen. This guy put up a post saying, something to the effect of Charlie Kirk dead at 31. I mean, he had like a song up on Spotify or whatever it is. Yeah. And I don't even want to get into this, but there's a report, and I think that podcaster Steven Crowder has apparently been subpoenaed to testify before Congress because he leaked this. And I'm not saying anything other than what he said and what's been written about in the Gateway Pundit. And I don't know if this is true or not, but they say that they found the gun which he dropped in a forest as he was fleeing, and that there's like writing around there on the gun or something that indicates that that he was Antifa and that he was trans. Now, I'm not here to say that. That's been already reported. I am not saying it's true because I don't think we know yet. Not that it even matters. But the main point is that Charlie Kirk was killed because he was a Trump supporter. That's what it's about, in my opinion. And that they took out one of the main generals in the Trump movement. And it sends a message to all of us that we better get in line. I wonder if anyone is now going to step up in Charlie's organization and do this kind of work on colleges. You'd be afraid to. Now, I personally, maybe this I'm showing my own kind of craziness here, and I felt this way right after the brutal genocidal attack on Israel 2 years ago in October. And that is that I feel like I want to do it. And that, Charlie Kirk was only 31 years old. He had a young family. He had a whole fascinating and amazing life ahead of him. I, on the other hand, am, nearing 70. I've done whatever it is in life. I feel a calling, this Judaic idea, tikkun olam, healing the world, doing something to leave a legacy beyond this small podcast and my books, but something that really could have an impact. And I feel like I want to get in there and do it. And if I get blown away, look, again, I mean, I'm, to use the Shakespearean saying, shuffling off the mortal coil, right? I mean, the final curtain is starting to move. I don't have as much time ahead of me as I have behind me.
Well, and the hope behind this killing was to create a chilling effect, but
that's what I mean.
The opposite effect, because the left is there are people like John Fetterman who I think any day now is going to be changing party affiliations.
Looks that way.
He was ranting about Mondani and how in the world can they support some commie like this guy. But now when he sees, and if you recall, there was a scene where somebody asked for prayers for Charlie Kirk's family in Congress, and it was booed by the Democrats.
Yeah, I saw that. Horrible.
So you have essentially a godless institution that was completely created back in the early 60s. I have no idea, really, why it was so easy for the institutions to suppress this, other than the institutions are fundamentally corrupt. There's no other way to look at it. I mean,
I don't think
why was it so easy? Why was it so easy to secularize the entire country in what amounted to 2 or 3 years?
It didn't happen overnight. They've like moved people up the rat line, and they expunged and expelled people gradually, almost imperceptibly. It's like the frog in the petri dish. Right now in my history class, I'm studying the French Revolution, and particularly the Terror period. And the teacher has sanitized everything in a way. It's like they get into technical things. They don't talk about what happened. But what happened is that Louis XVI, who was very popular and very admired in France right up till after his execution, he saw that Paris was going into a state of complete insurrection because of these underground movements, because of the Jacobins and these other secret societies. Now, there were writers at the time who connect that to the Illuminati. That may be true. It may not be. It doesn't matter. The fact is that they wanted to overthrow what had been a peaceful French Revolution when the king called for the Estates General to convene, and he accepted a constitution and swore an oath to that constitution. That was it. That was the French Revolution. And it happened without a shot, and it was popular. And they were moving toward various needed reforms, like getting rid of feudalism and other things that France wanted to do, and very much inspired by the American example. And but this underground movement created, they basically, which is the left today, they glorified the idea of violence as a political tactic. And they're thrilled by it. It's almost like a ritual for them. I mean, nothing has changed. And they also began this network of cells across France who were spying on people. Again, nothing has changed, has it? Right? Where they're reporting on people who are not, they're not loyal to the Republic, or they're not this, or they're not that. And Louis and his wife, who was very conservative and who was a monarchist, she reacted, maybe overreacted, by saying, we have to go back to the absolute monarchy. We can't have this. We have to crush it completely. Her brother was the Emperor of Austria, so she came from this, this European Habsburg aristocracy. And maybe that's an overreaction. And Louis wasn't in agreement with that completely. I mean, he leaned that way. But they both understood that something had to happen, or else the country was falling apart. So eventually it got so dangerous that they fled. And they did so very awkwardly. They should have put on clothes and gotten the hell out. But instead, they have to get out with this great coach, and she needs her head. So the point. So it didn't work, and then so they were taken back to Paris and put under a state of house arrest. And that's when the Jacobins really had a field day with propaganda. He's a traitor. He's a coward. He's consorting with foreign enemies which he very well may have been, by the way. But the point is, it wasn't because he was disloyal. It's because he was trying to reestablish sanity in his country. He was trying to take on this radical group that was openly conspiring to overthrow the very government and the constitution that he had sworn to uphold. But they became so powerful in Paris, and that they eventually were able to behead him and his wife and create the Reign of Terror, where they came out in the open at that point, and it was the world's first communist movement. And that's what we're looking at now. They're using terror, which they revere and they glorify even if they don't say so publicly right now, and violence. And they're basically denouncing and snitching on anybody that doesn't agree with them. They said a word that might have been, an insult to Black people in 1963. Right? All of a sudden, they're a non-person. They use this kind of tactic against people. They have the nerve to call people anti-Semitic when, in fact, they're like, they're supporting Hamas. But never mind that. You're anti-Semitic because you did this and you look that way. It's an insane like speech control. It's an informal tyranny. And they are moving toward, revolution. I'm convinced of it. And this is a major, uptick in it. The fact that they've done this. I mean, this is really an act of, it's the anarchism of the early 20th century. There was actually an event in 1919, right after World War I. On June 6th, 1919, when bombs went off in the homes of about 12 or 13 federal officials and judges around the country, including California. There's a couple in Boston, there's a couple in New Jersey, there's a couple in New York. And one of them went off at the house of the Attorney General of the United States at the time, A. Mitchell Palmer, blowing the whole front of his house off in Washington, D.C. He had his young family in the house. Nobody was injured, and actually his neighbor came over to help him. His neighbor happened to be Franklin Roosevelt. And he, it was like a complete, an insurrection. And Palmer responded by rounding up all of the anarchists and putting them on a big boat and sending them out of the country. They call it the Palmer raids. That's how it's gone down in history. But it put an end to it. And he appointed this young guy to head up this new service that would investigate, named J. Edgar Hoover.
Right.
And, back then, the final blast of this anarchist movement, this leftist radical socialist movement, was a bomb going off on Wall Street in 1920, which I think 50 people, huge bomb, 50 people were killed. There were body parts strewn all over Lower Manhattan. And that was the end of them. After that, we didn't hear from them again in this country until the 1960s when they started making a comeback. But the point is that maybe that's the action that we need. We have to have a federal government that understands the nature of this enemy and really takes action. Really, and even if they're vilified, who cares? A. Mitchell Palmer has gone down history as evil. Who cares? The point is he can sleep well. He's in heaven. He did the job of saving his country, right?
Remember we had this discussion last week, and you talked about Joe McCarthy.
Yes, another one.
Went down in history, vilified, and so on. All right, and part of this is that academia is a cesspool, right?
Right.
Every historian is a liberal commie.
Right. And they are.
So it's not always that the victors, in that sense, write the history. So it's the institution's been completely corrupted, and there has to be, and I think there will be, a zero tolerance policy. Okay, and maybe it goes back to this feminization of Christianity, where Jesus was some sort of Galilean flower child,
right?
And when I've had these conversations with people, I say, "Have you ever read the Gospels?" He was condemned one third of the time.
Yeah, he was like screaming at this at the conspiracy of his day, right? And the people that were, the deep state back then, the same people that have been saddled the world in every generation.
Yeah.
And you mentioned McCarthy. He was villainized, the most hated man in American history. Not so. People liked him and admired him. And
no. He was actually liked, but the way it's taught.
Yeah, but the point, as I said last week, I don't care. Let them teach it any way they want. The fact is, he saved his country. They can call it whatever they want.
Well, no, but here's the problem. Right? Okay. We happy few who know the truth, that's fine. But if you're some impressionable kid in high school history, you're going to get the wrong impression of Joe McCarthy. Okay. So when my son said, "What in the world can we do to change this?" And I said, "Look, it's really very simple. You eliminate all public schools. You can't save it."
So Sam Blumenfeld, right? Is public education necessary? One of his books.
Well, he was way ahead of his time, that guy.
He was a great man. And he saw the conspiracy that had taken over education all the way back to the days of Horace Mann and the that whole system.
He was talking like this in like the early to mid 60s, right?
He was, and he wrote a whole shelf of books, which I can't recommend more highly. Another guy that wrote some great books on this is John Taylor Gatto. He was formerly the teacher of the year in New York City. He wrote about the history of education and how the Rockefeller Foundation and all these rotten, big money groups kind of got involved in it and started to
Right.
corrupt it and use it. They wanted to. Sam talked about a collusion between what is conventionally thought of as the left and the right. On the left, you had people like John Dewey, who wanted to create a socialized human being, a human, like fused person that was basically a basket case, somebody who didn't have his own thinking and his own identity. And then on the right, you had people like John D. Rockefeller, who wanted what he called, quote, human resources, people who could punch a time clock. When they had factories where you had 3,000 people every day, they didn't want to have somebody who could think for themselves. It was a conspiracy by both sides to create
this is what, Chuck, they called the bootleggers and the Baptists, so to speak. They're on supposedly opposite sides, but yet they're fighting for the same thing.
Yeah, it's an unholy collusion between both sides to create a controlled, dumbed down citizen who's going to be docile. I mean, that's why the John Birch Society, I think about them. We talked last week about RFK and what a folk hero he is. They were talking about this in relation to putting fluoride in water, right? It created like a dumbing down effect, and deliberately so. And I believe that. I don't know that because I'm not a medical person, but it's a toxic substance. Maybe a little bit is okay on the teeth, I guess, but to put it in the water system and have that constantly in your system year after year, it gets into everything. It gets into the food, it gets into the soil, and it is a toxic metal. It has created, the goal being to create a docile, atheistic citizenry that can be manipulated and molded. You have a guy come along like Charlie Kirk, right? Like Donald Trump. Kirk is telling young people, hey, first of all, I believe in God and I believe in Christ. Secondly, I believe that we have self-agency. We're under God. We're created in God's image, and we have the ability to think for ourselves and function ourselves. That's why I dropped out of college, right? He wrote a book about this. Like, I didn't want to be indoctrinated. I wanted to learn.
Let me stop you right there. Academia hated him for that.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. When he came up with college as a scam.
Big enemies. Big enemies for that book. Yeah, I mean, he actually wrote a book about why he did not go to college.
Well, it became, I think, it was one of these things that was all around and was sort of obvious. But remember, because, I mean, I'm older than you, and it was drummed into my head from the time I was 5 years old that you have to go to college. So it's kind of like one of these axioms of life where you're just supposed to accept it. In other words, diversity is great. It's never explained why, but it's great. So you have to go to college because. All right. So any high school student can relate the fact that they know a bunch of guys who maybe got C's in high school, went out and learned a trade, developed a business, ended up doing very well. And they see all these people that went to college, spent all this money, although back in my day, it wasn't all that much, and ended up getting a job doing something, working for an insurance company, or whatever it is, where number one, they didn't need that diploma.
Right.
They wasted X number of years. So in that sense, it was a scam. Of course, if you want to have a profession, that's a different story.
I mean, if you want to be a doctor, but even then, I mean, it's been taken over by the Flexner report. But putting that aside, even my own limited, small experience right now at ASU, I can see what a scam it is. I mean, it's just gobbledygook. It's crap. I mean, for me, it's interesting because I get to look at the inside of what this is. Plus, I do my own thing. It gives me a little structure. I mean, the professor talks about the French Revolution in a very sanitized way. But for me, it gives me motivation to go a little deeper and look at it and actually learn it and read some things that I would not have otherwise read. So for my purposes, it's great. But I think about the younger people in my class, people who just graduated high school, maybe, I don't know. They don't know what the hell is going on. They're taking the stuff, dictated to them. They don't even care. I mean, they just want to get through it. Right. And it's a lot of it is just, it's just wrongheaded, and a lot of it is toxic. And President Trump is standing up to it by saying, we have to encourage the trades. We have to encourage homeschooling. We have to encourage charter schools, which are run by businesses. There are other approaches, and people are waking up to that, which is why, again, people like Trump and people like Charlie Kirk, may he rest in peace, are enemies of this establishment view.
Well, of course, another one is RFK Jr.
Oh, my God, yeah.
Big pharma. And believe me, there's going to be some major things coming out.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, already. I mean, the link between autism and vaccinating children before they're even out of the hospital. Obviously, I know a case like that even in my own family, where this kid was born and he was fine, and then he received something like 6 vaccines, because Massachusetts back then, they've gotten better. They've backed down now. But the state mandated like 6, 7 vaccines. And he became sick, he became feverish, and he's never been well. Even to now, he's a man in his 30s. He's not well.
Right.
He's permanently damaged. They will never admit this, but I saw what I saw. And
well, this is another one of these axioms of society that, just by definition, this is good. And even I, who follow science, when it came out a few years ago, there's basically no clinical trials on most of these vaccines, I was shocked. Or or as RFK has said, they did something for 3 weeks on 20 kids or whatever. So it's pretty clear. But it's been such an article of faith for people and part of science that...
Well, they worship this, particularly the COVID. It seems to be a cult following. I mean, Elizabeth Warren was screaming at him about, you're not going to have access to the COVID shot. You promised we'd have access to the COVID shot. The point is that nobody is taking the COVID shot. I wonder if Elizabeth Warren, when the last time she got a COVID shot. I don't think any time recently. Yeah. No one's doing it. Then here in Boston, they have this news special where this woman gets up. I mean, I can't get my COVID shot now. It's hard to get it. This is a lie. She's not taking the COVID shot. No one is. It's like there's a cult group that might still be taking it. They're the same people who are walking around publicly outside with masks on, and their face is all ashen. They look like hell. That's out there, but very few. I mean, we're talking about a fraction of 1% of people who are still lining up. I mean, I hate to break it to them, but the pandemic, to the extent it ever existed at all, has been over for 5 years. And the COVID shot, it's been admitted by the CDC here. They're going to shut me off on TikTok. Watch this. It's been admitted that it doesn't do anything for immunity. Why take it? It's dangerous. Anyways, I better stop there because I don't want to get shut. Maybe I'm going to shut off TikTok before they shut me off. How's that? Yeah, I'm just going to end it because I don't want to.
Okay, but think about this. All right, this isn't even controversial anymore. All right, you got to be deaf, dumb, and blind to not realize that they don't work. Okay, so what? This is some sort of article of faith now that you have to accept to be, quote, scientific. It's just pathetic. And as I told my son last night, you know what? You can't hate academia and the media enough. I don't care how bad you think it is, it's worse. It got to the point, I don't know if you know this, Blue Sky, of course, the liberal version of X, actually warned its users not to post any of this inflammatory gee, we're happy that Charlie Kirk got assassinated and stuff. They actually had to do that. They're worried about consequences now.
Good.
And I think it's about time.
It should be. And that, if there wasn't this kind of like sense of control, they would have been pretty much out in the open about it. It's like in Israel when somebody kills a couple of Jews by going into a pizza parlor, you have Palestinian Arabs handing out candy and celebrating.
Yeah.
It would have been like that, and that's probably, if you scratch the surface, the way they feel about this. And they're just containing it. But I guess that my question is that, given the fact that regardless of who they find and all of that, it looks like a political hit. It looks like they took one of the major MAGA people off the stage. It is a serious loss. There's no question around that. Is this going to mean that other people are going to be fearful now? Is anyone going to step up in Charlie's organization and ever do these campus talks again? I mean, I think that he was the only one who could really do it. If I did it, it wouldn't work, because I'd fall apart. My head would blow up. I'd be screaming. He could do this. He could, the
advantage he had was he was not that far removed in age and experience,
right,
from the college students. If you went there as an older guy, or me as an old guy, you're not going to find so many people that of that age and of that temperament that are going to respect the knowledge and experience and so on. Because remember, it's been drummed into their head. All right. You go in and you take notes and you memorize what the instructor said, and then you regurgitate on the exam.
Right.
But
the question is there going to be anyone else, now that this has happened, that's going to step up? Because if we shrink away from it, they'll win.
Well, that's the hope, but I think...
I'll give you two examples of where that's happened historically. The Crusades, right, who have established the Kingdom of Jerusalem under Baldwin the Frank. When they were there, they were very excited. We've liberated the country. We're back to the homeland of Jesus. They were Christian Zionists. A group of women and children decided to celebrate by going down to the banks of the Jordan and having a picnic. And they went down there and they were all slaughtered by Saracens. But they let one or two people survive to go back to tell. They went back. They told Jerusalem what happened. And the reaction on the part of the Jerusalem Crusaders was to build a bigger wall. In other words, they withdrew. They reined it in. They didn't go out and put a stop to it. And that was the end of them. I mean, they could not hold on to Israel after that because they withdrew. I mean, they couldn't. They were not able to change the country. And something mild like this happened in Israel now. And the Israelis are a different breed. They're not going anywhere. But there was a terrorist incident. It must have been 10 years ago now. In the holiday of Purim, children dress up in costumes, and the girls put on like Queen Esther.
I remember that.
Yeah, and they were having like a wonderful child celebration in Tel Aviv, which was kind of a tradition. You go out with fun costumes. Everybody has a fun time. And terrorists showed up and blew it up, right? Little girls' arms were found flown across the city. Right. Their heads were blown off. It was a complete atrocity. And the result of that was that Israelis no longer go outside on Purim. They do it inside. They withdrew, in other words. They were like, okay, well, we're not going to risk this again. And there was kind of a contraction in the ability to be free and to celebrate because the terrorists were able to win. And that's what I think might happen now. if they're going to start to
I don't think so, because it you can push people to a certain point, right? And what happened with Charlie Kirk was so out there that I think the reverse is going to occur. I think they took it a step too far. All right. That the hope is that, from what you're saying, right, that everybody gets timid and so on and so forth. I don't know that the analogy with the Crusades is 100% true, because you have to put in the fact that these are French knights and Spanish knights. And after a while, you got to look around and say, why the hell am I down here? There's an infinite supply of these Muslim hordes.
Yeah, but they sent their women and children home to France. They were planning on really building a life there, and they decided it was too dangerous, and that was the end. I think they lasted maybe another 50 years, but it was
right.
all.
I mean, that's the point. What was their dog in the fight?
So either they wanted to stand up to this and create the society they wanted to create, or not.
Up to a point.
Right. But the point is,
if you saw those endless hordes coming in that are willing to die.
You beat them. Look, you do what the Israelis actually do. And that is that you continue to fight them back one at a time. Israel will find the enemy. They'll strike them. Look, they just bombed the house. And
I agree with you, but it's their homeland. If you're some guy,
that's the only way you can survive. You have to aggressively identify the enemy and take them out. And the Crusades failed to do that. Israel failed to do it in their own society.
The Crusades failed because they realized it's easier just to go back home to Europe.
Well, that's the problem. Can we realize, hey, it's easier to keep my head low than look what happened to Charlie Kirk, right? There's a video of him being shot. I'm sure you've seen it, right?
Yeah, but I think the difference here is
that's scaring the hell out of everyone.
Right, but we live here, and we're not going to let our country taken over by these commie maniacs.
I hope you're right. That's the question. Are we going to withdraw? Maybe, sit like you and I are doing right now in the safety of our little attic doing our show. I'm not going to, should I step out now and protest? Look at Owen Schroyer. Here's another guy. He goes out in the parades. He asks questions. He holds up a mic. What do you think? What is a woman?
Right.
He ended up being put in prison for 4 months. I don't know if somebody like that, there aren't too many people like that. Is he going to step out again? Eventually you have to say, hey, I have to take care of number one. I have to take care of my wife and my family. I'm old. I don't care so much. My wife and family are fine. They can get on without me.
Well, you're right. It depends on the individual situation.
Yeah.
But if you're somebody that worked with Charlie Kirk and this is your mission, that's a personal decision you have to make,
Well, that's what I wonder.
Run over by a truck tomorrow.
Are they going to make it? Charlie Kirk, as we say, he was a young man with a wife and 2 young children. That's pretty much describes the people at his organization. Are they going to risk everything now? You weigh the pluses and minuses, and you have to, take care of.
Well, okay, it ends up being a personal choice, but
right.
I think in general, this has been a wake-up call for the right. All right.
Right. Okay.
And, it just, you get to a point, and there's different degrees of it. Remember, what happened to all these trans women competing in men's sports, in women's sports? All right. That slowly faded away. It's still there a little bit.
Right. I get it. It's great success. People woke up and said, this is insanity. We can't do this. It's anti-women.
But now you and I can debate, well, what? Why did it take you so long to wake up? Well, you know what? Everybody doesn't notice this stuff right away. You and I.
Yeah, but some of these shooters are these are trans people.
With this sort of insight that something like this is going to happen. And it's almost like a Cassandra situation. You know, you see this, there's nothing you can do about it. But I think this was a huge wake-up call because the institutions of the left are starting to back off. All right. You know, when they went through the same rhetoric, well, you know, they brought it on themselves and it's hateful speech and all the rest. This guy got fired. When's the last time somebody got fired from MSNBC?
Well, now, of course, there is a, let me just look this up. There's a congressman who wants to set up a committee, a congressional committee that's going to investigate left-wing hate crimes. Which is great. I mean, it's about time because 99%
it's all been distorted is going to change too. All right. In that same conversation I had with my son, I said, look, the hegemony of the left has been ridiculous. He isn't old enough to remember this, but you are. That whole era in the 70s and 80s of these paranoid thrillers where the CIA was portrayed as a right-wing organization, and it was like to laugh. The CIA has always been a left-wing organization.
Exactly.
So where did it come from? So it was just the old projection, or whatever you want to call it, or the idea. Where did it come from? Who decided that Hitler was on the right? It was the same thing.
It was Stalin who decided that after Hitler double-crossed him with Operation Barbarossa. He sent out a memo saying that Hitler is to be portrayed as a fascist and is on the right. It's literally historic. And then at the end of the war, the communists sent out what's called the Duclos letter, which said, now we're going to portray the United States as the enemy.
Yeah,
we're no longer going to kiss up to the U.S. because now, you know, they're the enemy of Stalin. So, yeah, those were literal decisions made in writing by communists.
No, I understand that, but how did that change the perception of people who are Americans? You know, you go to the average college student, I promise you, they're going to say Hitler was a man of the right.
Right. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's an article of faith. Has been since Stalin. No, that's you know, and they say, oh, you know, President Trump made the point. He goes, this kind of rhetoric calling Charlie Kirk a Hitler and a Nazi.
Yeah.
You know, the response to that is really, no, I think he rejected socialism. He didn't believe in big government. He didn't believe in, you know, committees controlling people's speech and taking them away if they were, you know, against the state, actually. That word describes what they're about. But, you know, that's, you know, you and I, I'm trying to find this article about a congressman. It was on, maybe it's been taken off. It was on the Gateway Pundit. And he said that they want to set up a committee to investigate left-wing terrorism, which I think would be a fantastic development. You know, because that's a huge projection. You know, you want to talk projection. You know, they're claiming, well, this country's divided, both sides. Bullcrap. 99% of the people who are committing these crimes either are leftists or they are products of the left. They've been conditioned because they went to left-wing schools and they've been groomed by the left. You know, this is not a conservative thing. You're not going to have conservatives going out and doing this. I'm not saying it never happens, but no, it's not comparable. It's the vast majority of people who are committing the violent crimes are liberals. That doesn't mean that all liberals support that. Doesn't mean that all liberals are violent criminals.
No, but I'll tell you, it would really hurt your feelings as a liberal to discover what percentage of your brethren are actually violent against the other side.
Well, it's kind of like it's like the jihad.
Democrats or something would be okay with a Trump assassination.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the jihadists. The vast majority of jihadists are Muslim. That doesn't mean that most Muslims are jihadists. They're not. But jihadists are, I mean, maybe I'm getting in a little too deep here to say this, but the vast majority of pedophiles are gay. That doesn't mean that all gay people are pedophiles.
Right.
But, you have to basically take a look at a particular segment and movement and call it what it is. And in the case of the rise of violence, again, this goes back to the Jacobins in the French Revolution. They glorified and introduced to society the idea that committing terror against innocent people and spying on people is not only a virtue, but it's necessary to create this new kind of man. I mean, the communist movement, the red flag, the red stands for blood, the blood that has to be shed in order to create this new Sovietized humanity. That is just a fact. And that the Nazis were totally into this also because they're socialists. They believed that you had to crack a few eggs to make an omelet in order to create their purified racial fantasy for the world.
Have you ever wondered, though, how the fact that this has never succeeded doesn't deter them in the least?
Because it's a religion. It's what James H. Billington, the author of Fire in the Minds of Men, called a political faith. It's a religion. And he starts his book with the French Revolution. He goes to the Russian Revolution. Now, he was not some right-winger. It's a great book, by the way. He was one of America's most respected scholars. He was an advisor to President Reagan on perestroika and how to deal with Gorbachev. He was one of the masterminds behind the collapse of the Soviet Union. Reagan made him Librarian of Congress. He's just a brilliant guy. And he was basically liberal leaning. He was not even, a man of the right. But he wrote on this, and he wrote this book particularly, which I recommend, called Fire in the Minds of Men, where he shows that the French Jacobins, and they were inspired by the Illuminati, he says in his book, they believed in this political faith that would replace religion, this idea that man could be perfected on earth, and that the use of violence and terror was their method, was their tactic. In a way, it's harkening back to pagan times. And that it doesn't matter whether it works. It's a faith. They believe it'll work, and if it's not working, it's because they're not doing it good enough.
That's right. And have you noticed that all these movements, the first thing they do is try to shut down the church?
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, the French Revolution, they tried to license priests. And if you didn't sign this degree, you were executed. And they executed thousands, tens of thousands of priests, that they referred to the Catholic Church. Oh, that's a superstition. They always will demonize religion because it's an institution that stands in the way of their physical authoritarian control. And it creates an empowerment amongst people who don't listen to them, they listen to God. So, yeah, I mean, they'll demonize whatever religion is there, Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, they'll demonize.
Is it a little depressing, though, how easy it is to fool people? I wasn't very old, and, in these early 60s school prayer choices, I was 14 years old.
When they took out prayer from school.
Yeah, and then how was that so easy to accomplish?
It was the Supreme Court, and I remember when it happened. I think I was in first grade at the time.
Yeah.
And I specifically remember President John F. Kennedy saying publicly that this was going to change America for the worst. He brought it up.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, and he said, this is a watershed moment. This is a pivotal event that the Supreme Court has made this decision. They banned prayer in school. And by the way, the prayers that were said, first of all, it was an interference in a state issue. The federal government had no business putting their nose into it. It's like those are state decisions. And in the case of the states, it was a very generic prayer. It wasn't to Jesus. It was simply, we thank the Creator for giving us life, for giving us good parents, for giving us a good community. It was like a very nice generic prayer. And that if somebody really objected to it, they didn't have to do it. But people didn't object to it. It was part of the curriculum. It was normal.
So, but in you looking at this, which I tried to and failed, frankly, where was the support for this? Or was there no support?
It was not supported. It was,
Supreme Court decision.
I think people were shocked, and it was not popular. But yet, they went forward with it. I mean, it was like, this is the law, and it just became over time accepted. I mean, these things, they just become accepted over time.
Yeah.
I remember when I ran for office, the big controversy that year was gay marriage in Massachusetts. It had just been passed by the state Supreme Court. I could get into that, how that happened. It was very corrupt. But I remember that the editor of the New Bedford Standard Times, which was in my district, his name is something Unger. He gave a talk that I attended where he said, look, I do support the institution of gay marriage, but I don't think that we went about it the right way. You can't have a federal court come in, or a state court in this case, simply declare this, because it's going to cause resentment. We have to condition people toward it. We have to write editorials and just normalize it over years to get people ready for it. And then
you remember, of course, to interrupt, that in every state where a proposition was on the ballot to legalize gay marriage, it was defeated. So they had to go through the courts, which, by the way, is why I hate the court. That's not the only reason. But you may remember in the mid 60s, late 60s, Earl Warren was not a popular guy.
Mm-hmm.
And you could walk around and see bumper stickers, impeach Earl Warren. Because you had, of course, the school prayer stuff. You had the Miranda decisions. And you're wondering, like, how the hell did this all happen?
It was all done by fiat, and he was very unpopular. And there's a good book about Warren and how he was a change agent. But just to briefly touch on Massachusetts, since we're on the topic, Ed Pollock was the editor and publisher of New England Journal of Law. Very conservative guy. He syndicated it nationally, became super successful. Not a nice guy, frankly. I mean, I met him. He's not pleasant, but very highly principled. He pointed out that the whole thing happened because Punch Sulzberger from the New York Times had an editorial meeting, and he announced, we are going to promote gay marriage, and we're going to do it over this next year or two. We're going to write editorials. We're going to show happy gay couples. We're going to make it look great and normal, put them in those nice sweaters so they look like they're sitting at the hearth and having a Christmas, and put up a wreath and make it look like middle class. And we're going to say that to be against this is to be against civil rights. This was laid out by him, according to Ed Pollock. And he brought one of his journalists, a man by the name of Anthony Lewis.
Right.
He sent him to Boston to work for the Boston Globe to write these editorials. And he's got that syndicated nationally, and he kept writing those editorials. Well, Anthony Lewis's wife is Margaret Marshall, or was Margaret Marshall. And Margaret Marshall was the chief judge of the Massachusetts Judicial Court.
Right.
Okay, so you want to talk about a conflict of interest, because it was
What was Sulzberger's reason for wanting to push this?
He was a left-winger. He was the son of Sulzberger. It wasn't the old man. The old man actually was against it.
Right.
He took over the New York Times. He was a kid. Punch, they called him.
Yeah.
And he wanted to come in. It's like this, like the two sons of Murdoch, right? They're left-wingers. Their wives are even further left and pushing them. Probably that was true of Sulzberger. He had a falling out with his father, but he became the editor and publisher of the New York Times around that time. It was like in the 1990s and late 1980s, maybe. And he wanted this agenda. He decided, and he had the meeting, and he told, this is what we're going to do, and here's how we're going to do it. And so the first case was heard in Massachusetts by and presided over by Judge Margaret Marshall. And her decision mirrored Anthony Lewis's, her husband's column. It's a civil right. You can't deny it. And that's the way it is. Now, the idea of civil unions, I actually would be fine with that. That's not a problem. If you have a long-term relationship with someone, and you want to have inheritance, or you want to go to the hospital if they're sick, that's reasonable. But to transition it into, quote, marriage, that was the stickler. And that's what was the court decided and created a fiat. And anyway, I don't know exactly how we go. We were talking about the school prayer, simply declared by a judge.
Yeah.
And they weren't even in their purview. They didn't even have the constitutional right to do that, because the Constitution left those sorts of questions up to the states. Technically, a state could institute a state religion if they wanted to. They actually, in the original constitutional times, some of the states did have state religions, but they got rid of that because the people didn't want that. They voted it out, which is fine. That's how it should be done on the state level, the state legislature, not a federal government coming in and directly interfering in a state matter on religion. That is not constitutional, but they did it anyway. It'll never be.
There was just an overall movement in the 60s to change these things. And you were constantly being indoctrinated about how good this is and how modern it is and how wonderful.
Yeah.
And I wrote this article many, many years ago, looking at quote unquote landmark cases of the Supreme Court, and concluded they're basically all crap. Every single one of them. There was no real law behind any of them. It ended up being political or stupid or both.
It's fiat power. Michael Glennon in his book Double Government notes that William Rehnquist, who he considers to be part of the double government, and one of the Trumanites, he calls them, as opposed to the Madisonians, the formal government.
Yeah.
He worked in the Nixon administration. This is, maybe you could say it's on the right a little bit. And he put out a memo saying that the CIA could directly interfere into spying on American citizens, something that's completely unconstitutional. And then when he was appointed to the Supreme Court, he was the majority opinion, making that constitutional. Yeah. Complete conflict of interest, and not at all a federal issue. So I only mention it because that's what they do now. They come out, Roe versus Wade. There's nothing in the Constitution that guarantees, an abortion. That's a state issue. By the way, there's been a good decision today by an appeals court tossing out a decision by a Massachusetts federal judge, I don't want to mention the name, who decided that the government was required under the Constitution to give Planned Parenthood $400 billion a year.
Oh, right.
Even though Congress voted against it with the big, beautiful bill and President Trump signed it, and the Supreme Court already ruled that these federal courts can't do this. They can't make these orders, these SROs, they call them, these stays on federal law that's national. She went ahead and did it anyway, and today it was thrown out. So that is good news. And this was thrown out, by the way, by a 3-judge panel that were all Biden appointees, I might add.
Yeah.
I mean, it was so blatantly unconstitutional. I mean, Congress has a right to decide who gets funded, not some judge. And I mean, her justification for keeping that funding was, well, it'll hurt women. Fine. She thinks that, okay, go to the state legislature, go to Congress and get them to agree to that. Even then, take a look at, the Supreme Court should review it. But the point is that those are good developments. It is happening. These bad, unconstitutional, unhinged decisions are one at a time being thrown out. And that's a good thing. We can celebrate.
And it is a good thing.
Yeah.
Anyway. I regret that it's gone this far. And no one was buying it.
It's unprecedented that these federal judges have come up with these national injunctions. It's never happened before. I mean, there's been a few of them in American history, maybe as many as you could count on one hand. But then all of a sudden, Trump is in office, and there's over 100 of them.
2 or 3 a week, right?
Yeah, and they're working hand in glove with the ACLU and radical left-wing law firms like Perkins Coie and our good friend Mark Elias and these other scumbags who are like leftists and who are trying to basically co-opt the Trump administration and cut the power of the presidency and Congress, but particularly Trump. And they're not getting away with it.
Yeah, well, I think people have been energized. And if there's anything to come out of the tragedy of Charlie Kirk, I think it's energized our side a little more.
I hope so.
There really is great evil out there that we've been trying to coexist with, and you just can't.
Well, from your lips to God's ear. I mean, I hope that we stay the course and are not cowed by this terrorism, and that we don't retreat. I see people not. I mean, as a guy like Steve Bannon isn't retreating, and he already was put in prison. I mean, you listen to him; he's on fire. So it's Jack Posobiec. I mean, a lot of these people, they're not retreating so far. But, people have a life, and there are a lot of factors. It's a very dangerous time.
Well, that's the advantage the left has always had. They don't have lives.
That's right. They don't. All these guys I talk about, they've got young families. Maybe Bannon doesn't, but, a lot of them do. The Turning Point USA people do. And the question is, I mean, I don't want to ask them to do it because I'm just an old fart. I could do it myself, but the question is, are they going to continue to step up in the face of this terror? That's the question we're going to have to watch. Anyway, Mike, do you have anything? What do you have coming up on the Substack?
Well, of course, this threw a whole new curve on it, and it's probably going to be something to the effect that maybe this was the final wake-up call. But I've never been afraid to mention how evil the other side is. And people have a reluctance to deal with this. They don't, I mean, that's been my experience my whole life. I remember, I probably related this before, I was involved with a youth football league. And one family was stealing a lot of money from this particular league. And I accused them of it. And I was the bad guy. Right. Okay. Because people didn't want to face the obvious facts, what was going on. Why do we leave well enough alone? And gee, the money just seems to disappear. We don't know how. It certainly couldn't be those two wonderful people over there. Right. And people just have a reluctance to deal with it. But the problem is, at some point, you're going to have to deal with it. Yeah. And maybe we've reached that point. I hope. I think so. All right. So until next week. All right, Mike. God bless. Keep the faith.